I might not be able to get through this.
Why don't you go ahead and try anyway?
And this is my opinion and a few others, and don't agree. It's okay.
Okay. Ready for it. I'll say it's over 2 minutes.
Well, I'll read fast.
Time's up.
My name is Michael Marino, affectionately known by many as the Mole. Official gesture to the court of the infamous Presidio 27. I was surprised, elated, and slightly amazed to discover that an account of our demonstration on October 14th, 1968, at the Presidio San Francisco Stockade had been memorialized and displayed at the Presidio Museum. The presentation is unique and very interesting, and I'm sure all of the brothers will enjoy viewing it. On behalf of the brothers, I wish to extend sincere feelings of gratitude and a heartfelt thank you to the dedicated staff who laboriously researched, designed, and maintained the site. In order to present an historically accurate account of the event, I must point out that the original intent of the demonstration was not to espouse anti-war sentiment, but a drastic attempt to bring to public attention the murder of Richard Bunch and to expose the illegal and immoral conditions of treatment of prisoners in the post-stockade. There was no mention of war in the list of demands we presented to stockade officials. It was wholly a desperate plea for mercy, compassion, and some shred of human dignity from a group of hungry, fearful, and totally helpless young men seeking relief from the hell of the Presidio Stockade and the tormentors who controlled the entire decrepit institution. Because of what we did on that chilly San Francisco morning, the military began implementing strict due procedures for maintaining and operating detention facilities and the proper training and training of guard personnel. For myself and others of the group, that was the hope and purpose of the whole ordeal. For that end result, I am intensely proud. There were members of the GI resistance present, 5 of the 9 for peace and Doc Rowland, some of whom participated while others provided input during the planning stages. Because of their connections to the peace movement, we became a cause célèbre for the anti-war community. And because of the intense pressure they brought to bear on our government, we were spared drastically long prison sentences. And in several cases, the executioner's noose. Excuse me. The latter was the preferred choice of General Larson and his idea of military justice, which began with the extremely outrageous charges of capital mutiny. I personally saw the hangman's gallows that awaited us while I was in the USDB at Fort Leavenworth, and was informed by the official Army executioner that the scaffoldings weren't dismantled until all of the mutiny trials were completed in anticipation of being used to execute some of the 27. I know that our story led many GIs and civilians to begin seriously questioning the war and their ability to continue supporting it, and was a rallying point for future acts of resistance and civil disobedience. And for that, I'm also very proud. Yeah, I've always been extremely grateful for the wholehearted effort put forth on our behalf by the many, many people throughout the movement, without which I'm positive some of the brothers would still be incarcerated. God bless those who cared enough to help, and all of the surviving brothers.
Larry Sales. I was brought here from Special Processing Detachment and forgot. They sent me here for a guard to send me back to get a discharge, and paperwork got lost. And it wasn't a real good place to be. This was one of our guards, Roger Broomfield. Probably one of the only ones that treated us like humans. Years later, I looked and I thought some of those guys had watched their friends die in Vietnam. So I could understand how they might have not had the best opinion of us. But a lot got changed, and I thank all of them. And that's that.
My name is John Collop. 10 years ago, standing on these steps at the end of Bush's administration, my words to the gathered group that day was, I thought we'd be further along by now.
Yeah.
It continues to be a rude awakening how low the bar can go. But the people who are gathered here today have, for the most part, I think, spent their lives in the movement and done some great things by just bouncing off the event that we started here. And the great thing is that most of what has been done by interacting with us has been really good and progressive. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
My name is Roger Broomfield. I was a guard here at this Presidio Stockade at the time of the mutiny, so-called mutiny. And I am honored to stand up here with these guys. These guys really made a difference. They stood up against the war machine, and they were punished severely. And I appreciate their efforts, and I'm glad to know them all. And I'm glad that more people are starting to understand that we can't shoot people in the back for no reason and be human beings. That's it, guys.
Yeah.
You're not going to speak?
Oh, you did? Well, you've been carried away here before.
Yeah, should I ask? Lindy Blake's children, would you please come up? And partner, Al, come on up.
Sure. So, thanks. So my father was Lyndon Blake. He was one of the 27, and so I think his ending up here is just an interesting story. But he was just a kid who really didn't know what he was doing in life, and ended up getting charged, or he ended up getting charged with a criminal offense. And the judge said, well, maybe if you volunteer with the Army, that would be a good thing for you. And so he volunteered with the Army and was promised that he wouldn't have to serve in the military, in this GI, and he would learn a trade. And they sent him for, and so he learned to become a baker, and he was promised that's what he'd get to do. And then he got the papers for general infantry, and he ended up here because that's not what he wanted to do. That's not what he signed up for. I think that's.
And then when he got here, he ended up getting a basically on a work detail with Richard Bunch, witnessed his murder, and became put in a place where he had to take a stand, and then ended up, after refusing to modify his statement for the military, ended up in the Presidio 27. And the rest is history. After he escaped and came to Canada and had us. So I'm so thankful for this event and for everything that everyone has done to put this together. It's quite amazing. Thank you.
Sure. You know, I lived with Lindy and Walter Pulowski and 2 other escapees in Vancouver for about 6 months. It was a little bit like being in jail, except we had everything we wanted and everything we needed, including each other, and we could walk around. I needed to say that. Okay, I'm sorry. Adrian, are you out here? Hi, Adrian. You want to come up? I'm going to give Adrian a brief introduction. Adrian Fong was a member of the clergy and laity against the war, I believe. I know at Howard Presbyterian Church. She was there when I was involved with the 9 for Peace. She followed me here and was one of my visits every Sunday as my fiance, and she was able to bring in information, and we gave her information, and here's Adrian to give her account.
Drop it down.
Good afternoon. First, I want to acknowledge that the Stockade and the Presidio are on Ohlone land, which for Indigenous people still struggle. Today is the 50th anniversary of the Presidio 27. We are standing here to honor the 27 young men who sat down within the fence of the stockade and were charged with mutiny. The 27 need to be honored today, not only for standing up to stockade conditions, the murder of Richard Bunch, and treatment of other soldiers, but many need to be honored for saying no to war, and for most of you for not going to Vietnam to kill people. There are a few of you who are Vietnam vets, and I honor you today too. I remember conversing with Richard Gentile, one of the Vietnam vets, before he landed up in the stockade. And I don't know how he landed up there, but anyway, he did before the event. Many of you have not seen one another since you served your time in Leavenworth, the military prison in Kansas. There are so many stories I'm hearing for the first time of experiences, many that have never been told by those in the stockade and from people working on the case on the outside. When the 27 were charged with mutiny, many of us were in shock and were naive to what military justice or injustice is. We learned fast what the Uniform Code of Military Justice is. I remember expressions of outrage and tears after each hearing and court-martial from families, friends, and supporters. During this anniversary, women also need to be acknowledged for their activism and strength in support of the 27. A few names I like to call out are Sue Rowland, Carolyn Bray, also known as Sorrow, Betty Foster, and there are so many more. These women followed you to Leavenworth and set up a house where other loved ones could stay while visiting or supporting their loved ones who were incarcerated. Special mention also needs to go to the Women for Peace, the Resistance Committee, which was very small but very mighty. Helene Hoffman, Vicki Playstead, Muriel Timosi, Murren Greenberg. These women worked on the 27 case on many different levels. Their compassion and relentless call for justice set an example for all. Many of them continue to house AWOLs even after the court-martials of the 27 were over. There were so many people that worked diligently on this case. The clergy that did regular visits while you were in the stockade need to be also lifted up. Phil Farnham, Mark Sullivan, Joe Sante, Phil Traynor, and more. And it's ironic that none of these clergy are clergy anymore shortly after the mutiny, so I don't know what you guys did. Then there were the families. Sue Rowland, Mr. and Mrs. Mather, and Keith's siblings stand out in my mind. Their love and support shined week after week as they journeyed to the stockade to visit. I remember Keith refusing to put on the uniform, so visits with him were in an isolated room away from other prisoners and visitors. This is a beginning list of some of the names of people that worked diligently on things, and this is only a partial list. This does not include everything, because there's some people I couldn't remember, their names. Okay. Support grew locally, nationally, and internationally. In Washington, D.C., there were a couple senators who read updates of what was going on with the case on the Senate floor. So a lot of that's in the congressional record. At the Presidio 27 office in Washington, I remember a room with many long tables where volunteers would collate the thick booklet about the case. I remember the phones ringing day and night. In Europe, the Presidio 27 were held up in peace marches. Resistance grew within the military. Many active duty GIs returning from Vietnam already knew about your case. There were aircraft carriers that mysteriously couldn't take off as scheduled to Vietnam. There were active duty Army and Navy people around this area that were also support and did organizing on their bases. A few AWOL folks also volunteered on your case. The 27 case not only exposed conditions of the Presidio Stockade, but was instrumental in eventual investigations of conditions in stockades and red line brigs throughout the U.S. 1968 was a time of elevated resistance to the Vietnam War and the military's role. The 9 for Peace and Presidio 27 mutiny cases also inspired people to become activists then, and many are still politically active today. The question that has been on my mind this last month is, how does what happened 50 years ago here to the Presidio 27 set an example to what is going on today? How can their actions be actively remembered and inspire young people beyond our memories and in the museums? There have been many cases of whistleblowers, like the Eric Snowden, Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning, and now the military case of Army Captain Brittany DeBarros. My hope is that people will awaken to what is going on today and act in the spirit of the Presidio 27. Lastly, thank you all for your courage as individuals and as a group. Each of you will always be a part of my life and in my heart. May the bond you shared then and at this anniversary remain strong. Special appreciation to all that organized yesterday's panel and today's event. Thank you all for coming.
Okay. Sorry, guys. Howard DeNike. Howard DeNike, come on up, please, Howard. Could you hold this? Hold it.
I'll get to that. So, in current times, when an Army unit is deployed to the battlefield, they return and a session is held called Lessons Learned. So I asked myself, what would a lessons learned be like considering the Presidio 27?
And what I settled on was a simple ABC mnemonic, which I think helps summarize the situation and what we have to learn. A sort of after-action report, to put it in military terminology. So, A might stand for audacity. The men who sat down confronted the brass, the command, directly. They had elected a leader, a chosen spokesman, Private Walter Pulowski, who addressed his set of grievances in simple, plain-spoken terms. First, an end to shotgun details, which had resulted in the killing of Private Richard Bunch. 2, psychological testing for the guards before they were assigned. And 3, fixing the unsanitary conditions inside the stockade. B could represent boneheadedness on the part of the command. I'm talking about General Larson and his staff judge advocate, Colonel Garnett. We wouldn't be standing here today if they had simply followed the advice of the pretrial investigator, Captain Richard Millard, who is here today, who had recommended that this matter be disposed of at the lowest possible level of court-martial, a special court-martial which had a maximum possible sentence of 6 months confinement. As the Army did, as the command did in Vietnam, a mistake at the inception led to big losses for the Army. C might stand for cohesiveness. Throughout this episode, the men displayed enormous solidarity and unity. And this was despite all the efforts that the prosecution could mount to drive a wedge between them. But cohesiveness does not materialize out of thin air. To the contrary, it comes with lots of different kinds of support. First was the excellent lawyering done by the JAG officers and the civilians, who are mostly quite inexperienced, like myself. I had been out of law school all of 18 months at the time. Plus the efforts of clergy, some of whom have been mentioned already, and the many activists and demonstrators who made themselves heard in the streets. Some of you have perhaps seen the commemorative coin, which I hold in my hand, that was specially minted for this occasion. On one side is what has now become the familiar image, photographic image of Private Walter Pulowski reading his set of grievances around the corner. On the other side is the names of the 27 individuals who took such dramatic action that day. I am very proud to have represented Private Ricky Dodd, the late Ricky Dodd, and Private Keith Mather. I am also exceedingly gratified that we are able to salute publicly these true heroes of the Presidio Stockade.
Amen.
Thank you.
At this time, I would like to invite all of you to move over to this side of the building, where we are going to read left side of the building, my left, as Keith is telling me, and read the names of the 27 and sing "We Shall Overcome" like they did that day. I think Max will play a little music to get us over there. And please watch your step. Like all the grass here, it's an unmaintained area, lots of gopher holes to trip you up, so please be very careful. Thanks so much.